We have a big update in the search for answers into how an 18-year-old high school cheerleader wound up dead aboard a Carnival cruise ship. We have learned who was reportedly with Anna Kepner when she went on a cruise to the Caribbean, where she would ultimately lose her life. And we're also learning, according to reports, about where her body was allegedly found, quote, stuffed under a bed. But does that mean this bright young girl is the victim of a murder? We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Stewart. Hey guys, before we get into this episode of On the Case, I need to talk about our partner and sponsor for this episode, the free app Upside. Gives you cash back when you buy daily essentials like gas and groceries. It's easy, it's free. I use it a lot when I pump gas or go to a convenience store or even a fast food spot like Taco Bell. And we are talking about real cash back. So after you spend, money appears in your Upside account and then you transfer it straight to your bank. So download the Upside app for free, buy whatever you plan to, pay like you normally would with debit or credit, then file a claim in the app and you get money back. To find out how much you could save with Upside, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on our screen and use promo code OTC to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Well, the FBI has been tight-lipped, to say the least, when it comes to their investigation into the death of 18-year-old Anna Kepner. Even her family have told media outlets that they are still waiting for information from the Bureau. And that silence by investigators, it has only fueled some gruesome online speculation into what happened to Anna Kepner. Now, this is video that was taken by a TV reporter named Sheldon Fox. He's with WSVN in Miami, and this is of a body being taken off of a Carnival cruise ship called the Horizon on Saturday, November 8th. That body was then taken to the medical examiner's office in Miami-Dade County, Florida. Now, that body is believed to be 18-year-old Anna Kepner. We now know more information that may line up with the timeline that the medical examiner put out about when Anna Kepner died. The ME listed her time of death as 11:17 in the morning on November 7th. That is the day before the Horizon arrived back at port in Miami. According to reports from the Daily Mail, Kepner was on the cruise with her family. That includes her dad and his wife. It is unclear how many other family members were with them on this cruise. The Daily Mail reportedly spoke to family who claimed that Anna's family took the cruise aboard the Horizon, a massive Carnival cruise ship that can carry roughly 4,000 passengers. It's really a floating city when you think of all the restaurants, the hotel rooms, the places for people to hang out, to have an incredible experience on board for a vacation. And this ship left Miami on a 6-day cruise through the Western Caribbean, places like Jamaica, Grand Cayman, and Cozumel, Mexico. Now we know through her TikTok that this was actually the second Carnival cruise that Anna went on this year. This is a video that she posted in May, being on a cruise with her family that read, quote, "I want to go back." Now this ship was on its way back to Miami after it had stopped in Mexico when something went horribly wrong. Now, Kepner isn't someone who appears to be a person who regularly got in trouble. Quite the opposite, actually. She was a varsity cheerleader, a former gymnast, and she had big plans. When she graduated high school in May, her parents told ABC News that she had recently completed a test to join the military after high school. She one day wanted to become a police officer in her hometown of Titusville, Florida, so she could protect people. Titusville is about 3.5 hours north of Miami, along what's called the Space Coast in Florida, because it's close to the Kennedy Space Center. All right, let's talk about this new information that we are learning about what happened during the final day that Kepner was seen alive aboard this cruise ship. It was November 6th in the evening. Kepner reportedly did not feel well, and she told her family while they were eating dinner that she was going to go back to her cabin. Now, this is according to sources who spoke to the Daily Mail. It's not uncommon for someone at the end of a 6-day cruise to not feel well when you think of the time at sea, the food, all of that. And Kepner went back to her stateroom, the outlet reports, and that was the end of the evening. So then we go to the next morning. That is November 7th. Kepner's dad and his wife met up for breakfast, but there was no sign of Anna Kepner. Her body was found at 11 o'clock that morning in her cabin. Her body was found reportedly by a maid when the maid entered the room to service it. Now, according to the Daily Mail, which claims to have spoken to 2 anonymous sources, Kepner's body, quote, was found wrapped in a blanket, covered over with life jackets, and stuffed under a bed. Now, as a reminder, we do not know the condition Anna's body was in, and the FBI has not confirmed anything about whether foul play is involved in Anna's death. And we also don't know Anna's cause of death at this point. We do know the medical examiner ruled her time of death as 11:17 in the morning on November 7th. And that may line up with when the maid reportedly found her body inside the cabin when the maid entered the room to service it. The Horizon returned to port in Miami the next day on November 8th, and that is when we see the video by WSVN of Kepner's body being unloaded from the ship. Now, according to Cruise Blog, which covers the industry, passengers said that they heard an alert for a medical emergency on Deck 8 of the Horizon, and there were a handful of guests that were notified that they needed to vacate their staterooms earlier than they usually would on the day the ship returned to port. The blog also says that the ship turned around and started its next cruise on the 8th, the same day that it had returned to port in Miami with Kepner's body on board. That ship stuck to schedule and it returned to Miami on November 16th. Passengers who were on the next cruise said when they boarded, the deck where Kepner's body was found was blocked off. Again, all of these reports have not been confirmed by police or investigators. Anna's body has been handed over to a funeral home near her hometown where she will be laid to rest. Initial autopsy results have not been released, and it could take several weeks for final results to be made public. That is per FloridaToday.com. I reached out to Carnival Cruise Lines for a statement, and this is what they've told us. Quote, "The death of a guest traveling on the Carnival Horizon voyage that returned to Port Miami on Saturday morning, November 8th, is being investigated by the FBI. Since this is an ongoing matter under the jurisdiction of law enforcement, it is up to the FBI's Miami Public Affairs Office to provide further details. Our focus is on supporting the family of our guest." When the FBI takes over a case, it definitely gets a lot of attention, but it's important to note that that does not mean that foul play is involved. The FBI says it is in charge of looking into suspicious deaths of U.S. nationals. On its website, the FBI says, quote, "The authority of the FBI to investigate criminal offenses and enforce laws of the U.S. on cruise ships, on other vessels on the high seas, or within the territorial waters of the U.S. depends on several factors, including the location of the vessel, nationality of the perpetrator or victim," and we don't know if there is a perpetrator in this case, "ownership of the vessel, points of embarkation and debarkation, and country in which the vessel is flagged." Now, it goes on to say generally the U.S. has jurisdiction over crimes committed on a ship if the crime occurs within the maritime jurisdiction of the United States and the vessel is owned in whole or in part by a U.S. person or company. Additionally, there is jurisdiction over crimes committed by or against a U.S. national on board a foreign vessel if the crime occurs during a voyage having a scheduled departure from or arrival in the U.S. So you can see why the FBI would be involved in this case. Ships like the Horizon, again, they are massive. And the cruise line has its own security team on board, but also the company has corporate security who communicate with the FBI about any potential crimes that happen on board the ship. And we've been told many people who are part of these corporate security teams can be former members of the FBI. On its website, Carnival says it has invested billions of dollars in just the last decade on security on its ship, and quote, "All ships are also monitored 24/7 in a state-of-the-art fleet operations center at our headquarters in Miami. In addition to electronic monitoring of all ship systems, the FOC is staffed by technical, marine, operations, and nautical experts to provide troubleshooting and problem-solving resources to the ship's captain and leadership team." It's unclear what kind of cameras they had on Anna the night that she died. We also don't know if Anna's death is foul play, but we had to look up just how many times murders happen on cruise ships because it felt incredibly rare. And according to one blog we found, it is very rare. The only blog that we found that's talked about this is one called Luxury Travel Diva that cites information from the Cruise Lines International Association, which seems like a trade group, that says there have only been 15 deaths due to violence on cruise ships since the year 2000. So it is very rare, especially when you think of just all the information that a ship, that a cruise line would have on every single passenger on board. It is unclear whether we are dealing with that kind of situation here. Joining me now to talk more about this is retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. I know we've talked about this case a little bit. This Daily Mail article comes out, and I'm just being very clear that this is not according to the FBI. This is the Daily Mail through anonymous sources that's reporting this. But if it's true that her body was found in this condition, let's say, wrapped in a blanket, under a bed, with life vests around it, what does that tell you about what the investigation looks like at this point?
Well, obviously, she's not going to wrap herself in a blanket and cover herself with life jackets. So there had to be somebody that did that. So that's really what the core of the investigation is going to focus on, is who put her in that state. If she had passed out or she had died of a drug overdose or some other issue, obviously that she would have found it, in a natural state, lying there. But the fact that she was allegedly found in this manner, tells me that there are other people that know what happened to her.
And the last time I think we spoke, one of the big pieces of information that we had from authorities was the medical examiner in Miami-Dade County said on November 7th, 11:17 in the morning, that's what her time of death was listed as. And then you have this article saying it was around 11 o'clock in the morning that the maid on that day goes into her room. Would a time of death be listed for when someone was found? If that's when the maid found her, or would that mean that there's something more there potentially?
No, and I'm kind of surprised they even released that information, but the time of death is the time of death. They're going to be able to ascertain that from the examination of the body, from blood tests, from a variety of the state of the body. I mean, the science behind identifying the time of death for a deceased is very advanced, so they can get it pretty close to what the actual time is. So when she was found and when the time of death, that there might be a discrepancy just based upon the information that's kind of flying back and forth, and nothing's been corroborated.
And how does the investigation go where if you found a body in this condition, and we don't know if foul play is involved, but they didn't get back to port until the next day? It was, I think people were told to leave their staterooms around 7 o'clock in the morning on this deck where all of it happened, but they're back in Miami the next day after her body was allegedly found around 11 o'clock in the morning the day prior. How does this investigation play out when you have these logistics like a cruise ship that they're dealing with?
Well, the hardest part is you're going to have to freeze the crime scene so nobody goes in there and destroys evidence either intentionally or inadvertently. So the fact that you have 4,000 people on this cruise ship that they also have to worry about, so they have to balance that with the integrity of the crime scene. So the first step would be to freeze the area where she was found. Like I said in the last podcast, that these cruise ship companies have generally retired law enforcement or retired FBI that are in their security apparatus that will give instructions to the ship's crew on how to handle that body to keep the integrity of the evidence sound, and then wait for the FBI to get there to do a crime scene analysis and then recover the body and get the body to the medical examiner.
Oh, because that was one question I had, where we don't know if there was blood found on the scene or anything like that, but if there was, and it's not just the body that was found, and hate to speculate, but it's like if it was an overdose and there's not any sort of evidence surrounding the body suggesting that there was any sort of foul play like blunt force trauma or anything like that, can you freeze a crime scene if it's an issue like blood? Is that an issue if you're not able to get on scene for 24 hours or so after a body was found?
Well, freezing the crime scene in this case is basically locking the door to the stateroom. and making sure nobody goes in there, and posting up potentially a crew member to make sure nobody goes in, nobody goes out, and the only people that'll be allowed in there are law enforcement. So that would be the first step. And if there's other people staying in that stateroom, of course they would get moved to another room. And then the second step is basically freezing all the camera footage, freezing all the potential evidence that could disappear or be erased in the time being, but between the time the FBI is notified of this case and then they actually get there and start gathering all this evidence.
And you, as someone who worked in the FBI, and there's been such public interest in this case, you just often don't see cases like this, especially on cruise ships. But the FBI hasn't said much. They're investigating. That's it. They haven't said whether foul play is involved or not. This has been more than a week that since her body was taken off of the cruise ship on November 8th. What do you make of just the lack of information coming from official sources at this point? Even the family of Anna has said that they really just haven't heard anything from investigators.
Well, there really isn't much to make of it. The FBI just doesn't discuss ongoing investigations unless there's some sort of political or public safety need to share that information. And secondly, it's always up to the family whether they're going to share information or not. And certainly they're in a deep state of mourning right now, so they're not really worried about what the public wants to know. So it really comes down to just letting the investigation play out. I'm sure the FBI will do a very thorough investigation, and if there were other people involved, then I'm sure they will be brought to justice.
And when it comes to the speculation that we see so much, and in this story, it has been, everything you can think of what people saying they believed happened on board this cruise ship. Now you have an article in the Daily Mail coming out laying things. What is it like on the inside for investigators when suddenly the public starts to get things going? Does that have any impact on the investigation or pressure to give the public something?
Not to the FBI. They'll basically ignore that media attention, especially in a case like this where it's a kind of it appears to be an isolated violent crime. Now, in cases of terrorism, that's a whole different ball game where you have to worry about the impact on the community and making sure that there's no other potential assailants out there that are going to harm people. But in a case of a violent crime where it appears that it was an isolated incident, the FBI has no interest in the media. They're not going to share anything. I would be surprised if they did. And they're just going to basically let their investigation play out. And the pressure, if there is any, would come from the victim's family and not from the media or the public.
And that's the other part of it too. I mean, the victim's family to this point saying that they have not heard a lot of information from the FBI. What's the communication typically like with family members when you're still trying to figure out exactly what happened?
Well, every field office in the FBI has a victim witness coordinator, as well as every U.S. Attorney's office. So generally speaking, that would be the entity that would interact with the victims, and then at some point, maybe the case agents or the U.S. Attorney's office would have a sit down or interaction with the victim's family. But at this point, it's just so early in the investigation, it's unlikely they're going to be able to share any information because they haven't got their arms around all the data that's still flowing in from their crime scene analysis, as well as phones, as well as video, as well as the interviews of the people that were around her, as well as the interviews of the crew members.
And Anna Kepner's celebration of life is slated for Thursday this week in Titusville, which is where she lived. And FloridaToday.com says her body has been brought to a funeral home near her hometown. From an investigative standpoint, we still don't know the cause of death. That hasn't been released. What does that mean if the body is no longer with the medical examiner or law enforcement?
Well, that tells me that they completed their investigation of the body, so to speak. The medical examiner has already done their exam, done their analysis, and the only thing they may be waiting for is a toxicology report, which takes some time to do the analysis. So it tells me that portion of the investigation has been completed, and now they're moving on to gather information that might actually disappear. Like I said, with video, people's memories, or somebody deleting photos or data off of a phone.
And let's talk about this cruise ship, because it's the term that I've always thought of it as is like a city on water, because you have restaurants, you got bars, you have pool decks, you have everything you can think about. A 15-deck cruise ship, 4,000 passengers on board. How do you go about, for the FBI, you get on board, you're trying to figure out what happened to this young woman, crime or not. How do you go about trying to get in touch with every single person that she may have been in contact with during her time on board a 6-day cruise?
Well, the fact that it is a cruise, that means every single person on there presumably has been identified, especially as the crew members. So they're going to just basically work backwards. They're going to have anybody they do miss or don't get to, they'll be able to identify them and find out where they live and send agents to their homes to do the interviews. So it comes down to basically logic and filtering. People who would be logically around her or interacting with her in the 72 hours prior to her time of death would be who they would focus on, as well as obviously family members and crew members.
What is and I imagine that there are surveillance cameras all over a cruise ship, but for a company like Carnival, where you are, I know they have an operations center in Miami where they follow a lot, and they've said they've invested billions of dollars in security over the last decade. I mean, what type of system are you working with? Like, how high tech is the type of security system and access to those type of materials that you would get as an investigator when you look at a company as big as Carnival?
Well, it depends on what kind of commitment they have to that kind of security. I would presume that they have pretty good cameras on the hallways as well as the decks. Because of the number of people there and the fact that they are so far away from law enforcement, they do have to have an ability to kind of monitor behaviors on the ship so it doesn't kind of spiral out of control. So I would presume that it's pretty good. And then the FBI in Miami has a very, very close working relationship with all the cruise ship companies because they are the primary law enforcement agency that would investigate these crimes. So I'm sure that they're going to get very good video, but I don't think they're going to release it to the public. That'll be something they use for their investigation and to further what they need to do to bring justice for this young lady.
For the FBI and being an agency that won't release a lot of information until an investigation is complete, because then I think of in cases where you might have a violent crime, and we don't know if that's what this is, but a local police department might at least confirm that foul play is believed to have been involved. Would you anticipate the FBI, until a final autopsy is back, toxicology, and if this is a crime that somebody's charged, like that's when we might learn more information officially from the FBI?
Well, it's also not necessarily up to the FBI. They're interacting with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And once they make a presentation to the U.S. Attorney, then the U.S. Attorney is in control of the investigation as well as all the evidence, and they dictate any information that would be released and not released. So many times the FBI is kind of considered some sort of monolith, but they're just a cog in the process, and they also have to abide by the rules of the Department of Justice as well as the local U.S. Attorney's Office. So to answer your question, I don't anticipate a lot of information coming out about this until they actually, if they do, find who participated or knew what was going on and there was arrest being made.
And then when you think about a toxicology test, I mean, often those take weeks to come back. Like if her body's gone and why does it take such a long time typically to, whether it be several weeks to hear a toxicology test or a final autopsy to come back?
Physics, you have to go in biology, so it takes time to grow the cultures or to do the analysis or to do the spectrometry. And so depending on what they're testing for, it could be days or it could be weeks. So it's all dependent upon what they're looking for and the level of sophistication in the lab. But I am sure that whatever that the true results will come back and they'll be defensible in court, and we'll get a much clearer picture of what happened to her based upon that toxicology report.
And this may seem like an obvious question because the FBI is investigating, but even though this happened, they believe she died, at least according to the Daily Mail, as the ship was in would be international waters going from Mexico back to the United States or somewhere in between Cozumel and Miami. These are federal charges that this person would face. It's not that they would face charges based off of Florida law. It would be federal law.
Correct. It's all federal. There's a very robust maritime section in the federal criminal code that governs this kind of behavior or kind of these kind of investigations. So everything would go through the U.S. Attorney's Office.
And if this does end up being a crime, we'll see how this case will play out in federal court. Of course, at this point, not a lot from the FBI other than they're investigating. And then, of course, we have this article now alleging some things from the Daily Mail. Colin Schmidt, retired FBI agent. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Many people are remembering Anna Kepner's life. Her car is actually parked in her senior parking spot at her high school. Her high school is Temple Christian School, and the school posted a tribute to her on social media that was written by what appears to be a teacher. And it reads, "You were a bright, kind-hearted young woman whose presence brought warmth and energy into the classroom. Your curiosity, your gentle spirit, and the way you cared for those around you made a lasting impression on me and everyone who knew you. I will miss you poking your head in my office to say hello and that turning into a fun 15-minute conversation. Losing you is heartbreaking, yet I remain grateful for the time I had with you and the privilege of you becoming part of our TCS family. Your absence will be felt every day, but your impact and the memories you created will continue to live on in our hearts." Per Kepner's obituary, her celebration of life ceremony is set for Thursday, November 20th. Once the FBI and law enforcement agencies confirm additional information, we will be sure to let you know. That will do it for this episode of On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.